big risks like bias. So ensuring that systems are debiased, and you can talk about that for large language models. You can talk about it in regards to computer vision models. You can talk about it even in terms of when we talked about auditory type data and information for auditory or let's say musical systems. So it doesn't matter the domain, that is a risk that needs to be addressed.
Welcome back to DC Decoded, a Gen AI podcast where we break down what happens when artificial intelligence meets the nation's capital. I am, as always, your host, Sam Lee. Today, we have with us Dr. Monica Lopez. Dr. Lopez is the co-founder and CEO of Cognitive Insights for Artificial Intelligence, where she advises on the risk management and governance of emerging technologies across multiple industries. She is also a senior executive fellow of the Digital Economist and a responsible AI expert for the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence. Monica holds a PhD in cognitive science from the Johns Hopkins University, where she is also a teaching professor in the Whitting School of Engineering and the Department of Computer Science and Center for Leadership Education. Finally, she was named one of 100 Brilliant Women in AI Ethics in 2023. Monica, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Yes, and for our viewers, this is probably our second or third time trying to get this off the ground. So we are warmed up and very much ready to go. So let's dive in. Monica, for viewers who might not know, what is Cognitive Insights for Artificial Intelligence and what inspired you to co-found it?
Sure. So we at Cognitive Insights for AI, we work in essentially bringing a human intelligence perspective to the design, development, and deployment of AI-enabled systems. So what that means is that it's all about integrating the fundamentals about human intelligence, how it works, into machine intelligence for the purpose of essentially creating more beneficial human-computer interactive systems.
Got it. And what clients does Cognitive Insights currently work with? What sectors are you guys involved with?
So we work across different industries and primarily in the private sector. And so that means that because I work in the industry of driverless cars and drones, but also in healthcare and biotechnology, and because I also have a prior career in the arts, in fact, in arts and entertainment, I also work in the creative industries. So clients range across those industries. And by clients, what I mean by that is I work with either product developers who are actually creating an AI-enabled tool system or organizational leadership at large that are going to implement some sort of AI-enabled tool within their organization. So I work with them at the level of really understanding how they can prepare the proper governance framework across the organization or within, let's say, the development of that product or service that the product developers are working on.
Right. And how did you get into this work? This is obviously very timely, very topical, but sort of walk us through your career path so far and how you landed up here for why you felt like this type of work was something that you wanted to pursue, you wanted to lead. How did you get here?
Yeah, so I've now been in the AI field so we're at 2025 now. I started my graduate work in 2005, so 20 years.
Okay.
And I chose cognitive science because I was always fascinated with how the human mind-brain works. And I always was interested in why is it that we're so capable of efficiently adapting to the world around us? And how we take in information and how we transform that information to do that adaptation, to do problem solving, to make decisions, and to ultimately survive. And so when I entered into the field in cognitive science in 2005 to work on my PhD, at that point, we actually knew, so anybody within that world already knew that AI was the future. I mean, work in AI has been going on since the 1950s. You could even argue since the 1940s, some of the earliest mathematical models on single neurons. But it has certainly progressed much further by around 2000, in the 90s and then 2000. So when I entered into it, it was pretty evident that was going to be the future. And so it was just me wanting to understand human intelligence, but also wanting to make computer systems, so artificial intelligence systems, more human-like and more creative.
Got it. And how do you think the conversations around AI have changed from 2005 to 2015, now to 2025? What has been that change from someone who has worked with AI for that long?
I would say the change is around two issues. One is obviously that we now have enormous amounts of data of all kinds, of from video to text to audio and everything in between. So combinations of that. We certainly didn't have that much back then. And so that's one big issue. So really the big data era, but also in tandem with computational capabilities. So that's one. The second is a return almost to really wanting to understand human intelligence. And I say a return because when AI was being born as a field in 1956, 1957, during that time, already the concept of wanting to translate human intelligence was at the core. Fast forward to now, I really see now a resurgence as we enter into already having quite sophisticated narrow intelligence, so intelligence that is for a specific task, but now to the next stage of what we call AGI, or artificial general intelligence, which there are many definitions, but the core one is that it's a system that is human-like. So it does have a level of capacities that the humans have, we do. So the discussion has now really transformed to, we kind of need to go back to understanding fundamentals of human intelligence and see how we can translate that into these new computational systems.
Right. I feel like we can go on so many tangents here.
We could go on so many. And actually, maybe there's a third thing, commercialization. Okay. So certainly the field of AI has gone through a lot of what we call winters and springs. And winters usually came about because either what was expected about the performance capabilities just didn't happen, but also funding dried up. Right. So, and then, the spring is where the funding's, really out there, which now we're definitely in that phase, but also because we're seeing a lot more advances because of computational power and therefore commercialization. So the third element is now commercialization and full awareness by the general public as to what AI is and capable of and not capable of.
Right. No, I think that's very helpful to differentiate. I'm curious, when you work with these clients across the sectors you mentioned working with product developers, people like building these AI tools, what is their level of understanding about AI? Are there like common definitions and work models these clients are using, or is everyone kind of approaching how they're integrating AI like in their own way, depending on what their company structure is or what their purpose is? Like what are you seeing when you work with these clients?
Okay, so that's a really complex question. The reason why it's a complex question is because we could essentially focus our entire discussion on what is AI and the different types of machine learning techniques, deep learning techniques that exist and that are being advanced. And each of them are so specific to their use case. I mean, we could even start breaking this down into what is supervised learning, unsupervised learning, semi-supervised learning. And so what I want to get at here is that essentially I work with all of that. So it really depends on the specific product. So let's say if it's going to be purely for computer vision type systems, or if we're talking about large language model use, or if we're talking about multisensory robotics. So that's merging different types of techniques. So it really depends on the use case. And certainly probably the most popular, at least in public consciousness and knowledge, would be large language models, so LLMs. But that's only one aspect of many possible type of techniques and kinds of AI systems that are being created and that are possible.
Right. Well, from your and your company's perspective, then, because there are so many different use cases and so many different ways to go about it, like what is Cognitive Insights focusing on in like 2025, for example? Like what are the use cases that you guys are prioritizing? Which ones are the most exciting to you? Can you talk a little bit about that?
So, well, all of them are exciting in part because all of them have the same types of risks. And so we focus really on the risk management and mitigation
Mhm.
of the development or the and implementation of the product. And so what I mean by that is that big risks like bias. So ensuring that systems are debiased, and you can talk about that for large language models. You can talk about it in regards to computer vision models. You can talk about it even in terms of when we talked about auditory type data and information for auditory or let's say musical systems. So it doesn't matter the domain, that is a risk that needs to be addressed. Also, when it comes to transparency for all of these systems, it's extremely important that we understand how and why they work. And so that enters into this area you've probably heard of in terms of model interpretability,
Mhm.
being able to interpret the models that are being utilized. So everyone really needs to be at that same level.
Right.
Then there's also accountability. So how do you ensure that that transparency is in place? But then you have a way, you have an actual model. And by model, I really mean more like a framework, a process in place such that if the system were to do something unexpected, if there were to be an error once it's been deployed. So once you have users utilizing it, you have a strategy in order to mitigate that and you would just have accountability. You have measures in place to ensure that someone or an organization can be held accountable for that. Same thing in terms of privacy and security. All of these systems, we need to ensure that they have robust measures in place, mechanisms in place to ensure that they are following privacy laws.
Right.
And I also work not just here in the United States, but with partners around the world, and particularly in Europe. And so there are different regulatory regimes there in regards to not just data privacy, but also in regards to AI enabled systems. So again, it really does depend on the use case,
Yeah.
on the specific jurisdiction. But at the end of the day, what we are focusing on is ensuring that a responsible, so that's really the umbrella term here, that a responsible AI framework is in place. And we help these organizations, these product developers to get to that point.
Right, right. And I know that you had recently put out a policy brief through the Digital Economist titled Bridging the AI Divide. Do you mind walking us through what the key findings were for that brief and what the implications are for both policy and industry leaders?
Yeah, so the purpose of that brief was really to answer a fundamental question. And it is essentially, is it possible to democratize AI benefits that we know are possible from utilizing this technology, despite the fact that we're seeing a growing divide with AI? And so what this means is that essentially, despite opportunities that AI tools provide, the AI revolution, let's call it that, this new revolution we're seeing is essentially underscoring what we call a digital divide, this growing digital divide. And so access to AI technologies is essentially limited to factors like economic disparity. So we break that down and we say, why is that a problem? Lack of infrastructure. Of course, you cannot utilize these systems if you don't have the infrastructure in place, if you don't have the data centers in place, if you don't have the right sets of data even available to use, if you don't have internet access.
Right.
And then also limited digital literacy. In many parts of the world, especially those in rural or underserved areas, benefits of AI are not even accessible. We have a lot of individuals, whether in underserved populations or in other areas that are, that can have full access to these systems, who don't even understand what AI is. So how can you begin to build policies that make sense if the individuals creating those policies do not have a full understanding of AI? And so we essentially walk through those different factors, those limitations, to basically provide recommendations saying, okay, we do need to build the infrastructure. We need to ensure that the data sources that are typically now primarily come from the West, and not even the West at large, so not even just Europe and the United States. Most of the data is coming from the United States.
Hmm.
So then if you're going to be catering to other parts of the world where we have other languages and other cultures, then there needs to be an infrastructure in place to be able to acquire that data so that it is beneficial for the individuals for which those communities for which that AI enabled system is going to be utilized.
Right.
We also have issues like, so it's not just public understanding of literacy, but also AI ethics. That is where the various risks that I was mentioning about accountability, privacy, security, bias, model transparency, explainability is really important. We have a lack of that. And so how do you develop, a solid talent pipeline and then also upskilling of your current workforce?
Yeah.
So we address all of those issues, and we see that it's not the same across all geographies, and you really get a different. Almost, you can imagine if you have a graph, you get different levels,
Yeah.
and that's not good if you want to ensure that everything you're fully democratizing the benefits of the technology.
Right. Right. And to close out this section, because your work does touch on both the US and also the rest of the world. I'm curious, like from your perspective, how would you diagnose how the US is doing with AI governance versus other parts of the world? Just give some contrast for us. Are we doing things differently in a good way, bad way? Yeah, how does the US stack up with the rest of the world?
The way I like to think about it is, or rather to talk about it, is to say that different parts of the world are approaching it in very different ways. So the European Union certainly has, they've done comprehensive legislation. So they have the EU AI Act, which in just like one single sentence basically breaks down requirements for different types of systems across different types of risks. So those that should be banned to those that are high risk to those that are minimal risk. And then there are requirements that developers need to comply with to ensure that they fit across those different risk categories. In the United States, we're seeing more of a patchwork type of effect going on where we're not seeing comprehensive legislation at the federal level, but we are seeing at the state level, the local level, very specific requirements around these systems, more based on use cases. So, I mean, we could go through a whole conversation here, but essentially think about it in terms of, if it's related to data privacy, or if it's related to internet requirements, or if it's related to healthcare, let's say software as medical device, as software as a medical device, or if we're talking about algorithmic use, or if we're talking about not allowing for the likeness of individuals to be created, and so criminalizing that. If we're talking about the utilization of robocalls, AI notifications, labeling. So it's more specific and more at a use case. And then what we're seeing across other parts of the world is, how with the GDPR, so the General Data Protection Regulation from the European Union, we certainly saw what we call the Brussels effect, where other parts of the world modeling their data privacy laws from the European Union, from the GDPR. We're seeing actually a similar effect with the EU AI Act. So I know certainly around parts of Latin America, several nations are actually mimicking or modeling their legislation around AI around the European Union's AI Act. We have in different nations across the African continent also doing a similar type of work, specifically more though on the data privacy side of things. And then China has also done a lot of regulation and has also done very specific regulation around deepfakes, which also the United States has been doing that as well, around data privacy, around large language model use. So, and again, we could have a whole conversation. Right. We actually break each of these down. But long story short, what we're seeing is different approaches based off of the norms and so the societal norms and expectations and ideas of human rights, about ethics, and how they relate to the social, specific cultural norms within those regions.
Right. That makes sense. Let's hone in on DC now. I think that even in just the past few podcast episodes, there's been strong vocal support for seeing DC not as a Capitol Hill or government in terms of AI and tech, but also a growing startup ecosystem and also more attracting more business interest in the tech and AI developments that are going on in addition to policy. So I'm curious from your perspective, how do you see the business and policy landscape for AI evolving specifically in DC, and maybe we include Maryland and Virginia in that as well?
Well, we definitely have to include Maryland and Virginia. I mean, if anything, when I think of the entrepreneurial ecosystem across the area, we always think of it in terms of the DMV area, right?
Right.
And it's very rich, and it's a pity that not enough people realize that, I think, in understanding how much it's grown across in fact, the years that I've been in business. I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but I mean, I'm on my second company. Cognitive Insights for AI is my second company. So my first that I created before that. Essentially, I've been in business for the past 15-ish years, plus minus. And so I've been part of this ecosystem. And in regards to AI, I would say there's a lot happening. I see a lot happening in the areas of cybersecurity, in the healthcare and biotechnology fields. I haven't seen so much in the driverless car and drone space. So the clients I work with are not within this region, but I wouldn't be surprised if that were to be another area that's just starting to grow. Yeah, I mean, I see it like the areas I mentioned, and we can go into more specifics about that. But I would say it's been steadily growing.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think maybe let me just add something because as to why maybe people don't realize that that's the situation here, because
Sure.
for the entrepreneurial ecosystem to grow, you really need to look at different factors. There's the factors of investment. There are the factors of academic institutions. And in terms of translation of technologies outward, there is the factor of government, of course.
Right.
And then there's also the factor of real estate. And so all of those factors come together in terms so this is a perfect area in which we have all of that very closely located, geographically speaking. And so therefore, that is what leads to it. That's what helps, let's say, to propel this ecosystem.
Right. And I think one example that's worth drilling down into, which we've talked about before, is the 270 corridor. So first, if you could explain what the 270 corridor is for people who might not know, and then secondly, how that regional growth might shape the broader AI ecosystem in the DMV.
Yeah, so the 270 corridor being essentially that whole area that crosses the Beltway. So we're talking about from DC, Gaithersburg, Frederick, Rockville,
Yep.
that whole stretch. And it's known as the BHCR, so the Biohealth Capital Region, and specifically to the biohealth, the healthcare, biotechnology world. And so we're actually number 3 at this point. So in comparison to, of course, the big areas of Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Boston, San Diego and San Francisco over in California. And so we're pretty much up there in regards to, in fact, the various factors I just mentioned in terms of we are a perfect place where we do see a lot of activity, essentially that's interdependent between new work and discoveries in academia, but also government partnerships and collaborations, funding, of course, grants from there. But also then we have a lot of really huge ecosystem in the VC world and the investment world. And then also the real estate I mentioned, because certainly we're talking in terms in biotech, we're talking about lab space, and even so, or even for, since we're talking here about AI, so even for creating robotic systems. So you need all of those various factors to come together to really propel a successful entrepreneurial ecosystem. And so I think just the fact that we have this in the biotech world and where we're seeing a lot of companies, startups, and so not just from the small and medium-sized enterprises, but even bigger, much larger corporations, bringing in AI within their products and their services. That is, I think, probably one of the top areas that's going to be a big boom in a really positive way.
Yeah, what are you most excited for, like for that boom? Like what, like give us some examples of what that could create for the region.
So it definitely means that we need a lot of people more, so the upskilling, but also those trained in data analytics, in computational systems, in robotics. So what are the big areas that we're seeing AI being used in healthcare? Clinical decision support systems. So that is where it's going to be really important to bring in large language model uses, computer vision use to create CDS systems, so clinical decision support systems that can aid clinicians across any sort of medical, disorder, disease, to help them with medical diagnosis.
Right.
But we also see a lot of work happening in medical robotics. So actual surgical robots that are being created that are AI enabled to help with surgery. We're also seeing AI coming into just the general, so what we call AI agents now.
Yep.
You may have
Right.
heard of that. It's real big. So I can imagine that also entering within the healthcare system to help with administrative tasks, but also cross analysis of data. If you think about what healthcare data is, there's a lot that hasn't been digitized.
Right.
There's a lot that happens, let's say, between, patient and doctor, but then there's also all the data that comes from apps, so digital apps. So, like wrist, like Fitbit type things, or that are
Yeah.
getting now much more sophisticated, or medical implanted medical devices. And so all of those are different areas where we're seeing use of AI. And then, of course, that's going to bring in the big issues of risks I was mentioning earlier. And then, of course, that is going to bring more opportunities for skilling, upskilling, for talent, and also for, and obviously that means for workforce development.
Right. Right. Very excited, and we'll see what happens. Let's close out with your teaching experiences. So, can you just kind of set the stage a little bit? What are you currently teaching at Johns Hopkins? I know you also do some teaching at Georgetown. So, what are you currently or going to teach?
Yeah, so I've been teaching for quite a long time now as well. But so what I currently teach is the ethics on AI and automation courses in at Johns Hopkins in the computer science department. So that course is specific around ethics related to the development and deployment of AI-enabled systems. But it's also because, and this comes absolutely from all my frontline work in the private sector through my company, policy and governance. So I make sure that students not just get an understanding of ethics and how you can implement it in a technical way, but what does this mean for policy? And then what does this mean for governance across the world? So I make sure that it's actually global. I also run another course, and this is through the Center for Leadership Education, on AI project management. So here, and because these are in the engineering school, I am working with engineers here. So for both of those courses. And so for the AI project management, this is, specific to how our company is now utilizing AI-enabled tools for the management of projects of all kinds.
Right.
And so there actually are quite a lot of tools out there. And so we have, I have students really critically evaluating them and integrating them with their different project management workflows. And then at Georgetown, I run what's called the AI Academy. It's during the summer, and that's for pre-college students. So these are the high schoolers. And I think even middle schoolers are coming into these programs. So that's really a great, really fun, super intensive 1 week course in which I literally try to put everything together. Like, what is the science of AI? What is the ethics? And then what is the politics and the geopolitics of AI? And so we sort of cover everything and during that 1 week.
Right. What is your stance as an educator on AI use in the classroom, both from the student perspective and teacher perspective? That is, I think, one of the most timely topics that people are talking about. So as somebody who's in that position, like what's your perspective on that?
Look, students are already using these systems. And by these systems, I mean large language models. They're using chatbots. So they're using ChatGPT and other, the other systems that are out there like Claude, Perplexity, Grok, and so forth.
Yeah.
So they're going to use them, and I know they're going to use them. So what I ensure in the class is I say, okay, fine, you can use them, but we're going to critically analyze them. So we're going to actually attempt to jailbreak them, meaning we're going to try to see if we can break down their safeguards, because I want you to learn as a student as to how and why they're built the way they're built. And in fact, when you do that exercise, especially across the different language models, the different chatbots that are out there, you can really see how different they are from each other. And so that's really great to learn, especially from the technical, but also policy side and the governance side in terms of how different companies are approaching the capabilities of these systems. So I take that perspective of, I know you're using it. Don't try to fool me that you're not going to use it, but okay, fine, use it, actually reference it. I want you to, so in assignments, I actually ask them to show me what the prompts they put in, create screenshots. And then on top of that, then reevaluate it, or then actually critically analyze it and see where the gaps are. So I'm all about being positive about it.
Yeah.
And instead of seeing it as a problem, as an opportunity for learning.
Yeah. Yeah. Last question on that as well. Like, what do you say to the teachers who aren't specifically teaching AI concepts like English, math, any subject, who are either banning AI use out of frustration or feel resigned to your point in a different lens of just like, well, they're going to use it anyway, so what can I do? Like, what would you say to people who aren't specifically teaching AI or don't have those types of opportunities to like test jailbreak chatbots as part of their courses?
I would say that they actually have to learn about these systems. I mean, I think to take that perspective of banning something that obviously it doesn't work. It's out there. You know, what do they say? The cat is out of the bag, or the genie is out of the bottle.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that what we need to do instead is we all need to understand. So we all need to have AI digital literacy.
Yeah.
So my argument to that, my sort of what I would tell them is, you know, take the time to understand these systems. Because when you understand it, then you can actually not only teach yourself how to use them, but then teach your students how to use them effectively.
Right. Awesome. Well, thanks, Monica. I think we covered a lot of ground in this conversation, and I really appreciate your time and insights, and I'm sure our listeners will as well. So I thank you again for your time.
Great. Thank you. It was so much fun. Thank you for having me.
That's a wrap for this episode of DC Decoded. I want to thank Monica again for her time. If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to subscribe to DC Decoded on your favorite podcast platform, whether that's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. If you found this discussion valuable, we'd love it if you left a rating or review. It helps others discover the show. If you are seeing this episode on Substack, please consider recommending us. It's free and really helps us better serve our audience as well. For more on the DC chapter of the Gen AI Collective, upcoming events, and ways to get involved via collaborations or sponsorships, check out the links in the show description. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you in 2 Wednesdays for the next episode.